Debunking the people pretending to have dissociative identity disorder, part 1.
Thing called polyfragmented systems, which means systems coming from repetitive trauma can have 100 or more alters. Just because you don't see big systems very often doesn't mean they don't exist.
So how is reading that information sheet going for you? Now, she's making the claim that all people who fake this disorder make, which is that you can have hundreds of these alternate personalities, they call them systems, and they just can all be aware of each other. They just kumbaya, they meet up for coffee, all that good shit. You know, let me explain why this is completely fucking fake, and the reason why you don't hear about it is because it doesn't exist. So here's how it actually works. Our brains are remarkable, and so is our will to survive. So when you're a little child experiencing such harsh trauma and abuse that at the time that your brain is in its key formative years, you're supposed to be a sponge, learning, you're formulating your personality, learning how to make connections. Instead, your brain is finding really clever ways to survive the intense abuse that you are experiencing. This can show itself in many different ways. For example, I was horrifically physically abused as a child. I used to describe it as waking up to my mother, like, fucking beating my ass. I just thought I was sleeping. I don't know. But what was actually happening is my brain was under so much emotional distress that it flicked off. It shut off. My brain was like, no, I need to protect you. Oop! That is an extremely powerful thing for your brain to override its senses like that. And I don't think you understand, appreciate, or are respecting the amount of trauma and abuse that it takes for your brain to get to that point, okay? First off, as many of us grow up, many of us are no longer in that direct traumatic situation. However, for myself, I then grew up in social services. I was on the streets. So what I was unaware of is that I was constantly triggering my fight or flight, my trauma stress response. So I had actually developed this other personality, this system, as these morons call it, and I always called her Kat. Yeah, I was kind of always aware of her before I even knew that I had DID. And what she was for me was that strong person when Chloe was weak, okay? Because Chloe is an abused, hurt child. Okay? Kat was stronger. Kat could get into fights. Kat could tell that bitch that she was intimidated by to fuck off, despite whether or not she was pretty sure that she was about to break her face. She didn't, but she was pretty sure, right? There's these fragments of you that learn how to cope in certain stress and trauma situations, okay? And you're not able to just fucking name them off all willy-nilly. Now, Kat, that was just my nickname. I've had this tattooed on me since I was 15 years old. Ask anybody I grew up with. But I always knew that, like, who Chloe was when she felt safe was very different to, like, who I was out on the streets. And when I became older and I didn't need Kat anymore because I became a mom, I actually went through this, like, crisis period because I had this coping mechanism, this, like, fight or flight response that was constantly ready to switch off. My brain was constantly in a fight or flight response with this, like, coping mechanism I didn't need anymore. This aggressive person that I didn't need anymore. So it showed its way in temper, in stress. I was very quick to get angry. And it was all because I was using this leftover trauma response that I no longer needed. My life was calm. So when you see people on this app saying things like, I have 12 personalities, one of them is SpongeBob, the other one has a British accent, and I'm fully aware of all of them, that's just not really reality, okay? They don't have different personalities, you know, like when I get triggered because I'm like scared, like I'm cornered and I think I'm about to fucking die, like I shut down, I start to cry. There's a dissociative process where you don't really remember like what's happened. There's a lot of shame, right? That could be a different fragment of my trauma, but I didn't name her Billy Bob Joe Jim Alpha Barbecue and then bring her on TikTok and say, hello. It doesn't work that way. I just feel like there is so many of these videos of people faking this disorder and not enough of people actually speaking candidly about what it's like to live with dissociative identity disorder, because the people who actually live with it, number one, have such severe trauma that it's like, man, how are you supposed to just get on TikTok and be like, hey, this is what happened to me, to, you know, like it's really heavy, but also it's really difficult to pinpoint, to understand. I mean, this is how your brain has learned how to survive and how to cope. It takes a lot of therapy, self-awareness, emotional maturity. Like, these are things that come with age. not watching a few videos on TikTok. So I just, for all the people out there who do have DID, I hear ya, and I'm sorry that these frickin' lunatics in elf ears that have so little of a personality that they need to like take the personality of a traumatized person or the quirky parts. I'm sorry, because I know how like disturbing that is. But don't be mad at other people because they haven't experienced the type of trauma and pain that we have, because nobody deserved to go through what we did. So if anything, they're kind of fucking lucky and they can just stay over there. Thank you. This was oddly therapeutic for me. Unapologetically calling out TikTokers who are pretending to have dissociative identity disorder. Part 2. God, that's a mouthful.
It's been recently pointed out to us that our switches are so smooth and subtle now that it's very hard to tell us apart.
I think I'm getting better at faking this disorder.
One of the comments that we remember very vividly, someone described our face as it looked like our face was changing gears. Pretty fucking hilarious.
God, why do people want to be abused so bad? What I need you guys to understand is the only people who develop this disorder are people who survived extreme childhood trauma and abuse, okay? So at the time where we were all supposed to be the most protected by the world, the most vulnerable, learning the most, our brain was instead coming up with really creative ways for us to survive. It does not look like this.
It's hard to tell, so we're just gonna switch a bunch of times and show you guys.
Although dissociative identity disorder is a very complex disorder, it is not very hard to spot the people who fake it. He's kind of talking about it as if he's just like, hey, yeah, my sad self and my happy self, we had a chat today, and I just don't understand how these people act like they can just flip their hair and transition to... I see an alligator right there. Yeah, that crocodile, that's 8,000 pounds and can bite my head off with one chomp. I'm gonna touch it. To put it very simply, somebody with actual dissociative identity disorder needs a trigger in order to like switch into whatever mode they get in that protects them, right? Whether it's, maybe it's fully shutting down, maybe it's kind of like a stronger, like tougher, like kind of different person like me. I don't know. It's different for everyone. It's hard to explain. Just remember that DID is an extreme stress response, okay? It's a coping mechanism. You don't just switch into it like... Just get a grip.